Looks like we're ready. Click here to start. Go live. Okay, so I think we're going live on YouTube now, so we should be live everywhere. So on YouTube, just for folks who know in the beginning, we're going to be kind of broadcast only on the YouTube side. I won't be able to monitor the chat because I have a very basic setup here, and I've only got really one screen. So I'm going to just mute that completely so I'm not getting feedback.
Sorry.
I'm going to change my picture here so that I get you front and center on our side. Let's see here.
That's fine. Oh, you're trying to put it in the middle?
Yeah, I was just trying to get this.
So we're live. We're still trying to figure this new system out, but it's good to see you, Sarah.
You too.
I like your sweatshirt.
Thank you. It was a gift. So, a birthday present.
I have to send you a Navy one. I can't have you just represent the Marine Corps over there.
I would love a Navy one.
All right, well, we'll keep this like this.
I definitely will send you one.
For some reason, I can't figure out how to get the camera set up the way that I want to on my side, but that's okay because I know that everybody else can see us.
Yeah, it's
just
good.
like that. All right, cool. So, all right, so I'm gonna, since I actually do like record the actual podcast during this, I'm gonna do a quick countdown. I'll do my standard little podcast intro. You'll hear me kind of do some standard verbiage here for those who are watching us live. I think there's a couple so far.
Yep. This is how our podcast is recorded.
This is how we record the podcast. All right. So you're going to see me kind of looking over here at my little script that I have for myself, and then we'll jump right into it. So, all right. So we'll start in 3, 2. Welcome to Talk with History. I am your host, Scott, here with my wife and historian, Jen.
Hello.
On this podcast, we give you insights to our history-inspired travels, YouTube channel journey, and examine history through deeper conversations with the curious, the explorers, and the history lovers out there. Today, we are joined by Sarah, better known as the History Chick 1941 on Instagram and YouTube. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. So before we get to chatting with Sarah and before I introduce her, I want to ask folks to give us a review wherever you're listening. The reviews truly help the show grow. And come on, the faster we grow, the faster we can catch the History Channel as far as followers on all their social media stuff. So click the link in the show notes to subscribe for free on your platform of choice. Now, our guest tonight is Sarah, and she is the host of History Behind the Page. And if you don't know this fantastic series yet, it's a live Instagram series where you get to know the people behind your favorite history pages, channels, movies, TV shows, books, and much more. If you enjoy this podcast, I can guarantee you will enjoy her live interview streams. And Sarah is now also posting these on YouTube. So thank you for joining us tonight. Sarah, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Blaze, stop drinking water. Sorry. My dogs are laughing.
It's okay. It's okay.
So loud.
That's
I'm
all
doing
right.
Good.
It's okay.
Good.
You can
it's Friday. Yeah. So I'm doing good. Good. It's Friday, so it's good.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I understand if you have to go help out the pup back there. So just let us know. But Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? It's usually how I kind of like to open it up with guests is tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe where you're from and kind of how you kind of became to be so passionate about it.
Yeah. So I'm Sarah, or the History Chick 1941. I live in Oregon. So I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I'm a true Oregonian. I was born and bred here. I'm not a transplant. As most of the people in Oregon are
nowadays. Yeah.
Lots of transplants. Yeah. My love of history really started in 8th grade. We were learning about the Civil War in our social studies class, and we were learning about it kind of interactively. So we actually played out the Civil War chronologically. So we divided the class in the North and the South, and then I was designated as Grant. So we read what happened in the Civil War day by day and just learned a little bit about it. And then we watched the movie Glory in school at the end of it. And it was just actually perfect because at the time I was really obsessed with Matthew Broderick, and I was in the Matthew Broderick fan club. And so when I saw, I was so excited. I was like, oh, Matthew Broderick movie. And then when I saw Glory, fell in love with it, fell in love with
Yeah.
history. And after the Civil War, all the eighth graders, all the middle school eighth graders, we did an event called Walk Through History. I don't think they do that in schools anymore,
Yeah.
but you picked a time in history and you dressed up in that time period. So whether it was you were a soldier in World War II, or like my sister was Betsy Ross. I
Yeah.
dressed up as Scarlett O'Hara from Gone with the Wind, and
Oh,
I
that's
did a
awesome.
presentation on the Civil War. So I had her like costume of the green dress, and each person had
The
like
curtain
their own
dress.
booth. Yeah,
Yeah.
each person had their own like booth. It was kind of like an expo. So you'd go to each booth, and it was all dressed up in props, and you would give the presentation.
Oh,
And
how cool.
yeah, it was super cool. And I don't think they do it anymore, but it was such a fun event. And so that's kind of where my love of history started, was learning about the Civil War in middle
Yeah.
school. And then in high school, I had two really amazing history teachers,
Yeah.
Mr. Beeman, and he was so interactive and very passionate about history. He made it fun to learn. And if you didn't understand something you were learning and you asked him to explain more, he would explain it in a different way and would make sure it would explain it until you understood it. And he, at the end of each week, we had these things called celebrations of learning. They were quizzes, but he called them
Okay.
celebrations of learning. So we'd come in at the end of the week and there'd be party hats on our desk, and Celebrate Good Times would be playing, and we would have
Yeah.
to wear the party hat while we were taking the test, and
Oh,
we
that's
couldn't take the
fun.
party hat off
That's awesome.
until we turned in our quiz. But yeah, that's kind of where my love of history began, was
Oh,
22 years ago. So
yeah,
Yeah.
that's super fun. Thank you for sharing that with us. I mean, that's really cool to hear. Like, it sounds like your your school essentially put on a science fair, but for history.
Yeah, like History Day.
it
It
pretty
was
yeah, it was. Yeah.
that's such a neat idea. I don't think I've ever actually heard that before. But
Yeah, that's really
leave
cool.
it to the Pacific Northwest to do things a little bit different, a little bit more fun. So how did that eventually translate into you starting to do this live series?
So I've been in and out of history for a while. I after high school and stuff, I was working in mostly historical films with a local film company here, doing
Okay.
hair and special effects makeup.
Cool.
And I became friends with a bunch of other history nerds
Yeah.
like me, collectors and historians and all this stuff. I lost my passion for history for a while,
Sure.
just because of life and stuff. And
Mhm.
then when COVID hit, I lost my job because of COVID, reduction in force. So my
Yeah.
position was eliminated. And I started to get back into history again. And then on December 7th of last year, the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, I was I was sitting in my room, and I was just like, I really want to make a history post, but every time I make history posts, like, people roll their eyes, and I don't get nobody likes it or whatever, and I want to share this. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna start an Instagram page.
Yeah.
And so I started, my first post was a Pearl Harbor post on December 7th of last year. And then around February, I wanted to do more. I started meeting all these really cool history people, and I wanted to know their why. I wanted to know how they got into history. I'm a very curious person.
Sure.
I love, especially in like movies and stuff, I love the behind the scenes or the making of and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I was curious about how a history lover, somebody else like myself, how did they get into history? How did they start a YouTube channel? How do they find their content and travel and all this stuff? So I was like, my curious little brain, I was like, I'm gonna start a live series. And so the first person, of course, who I just couldn't wait to interview was JD from the History Underground. And because I'd been following him for a while, and I was so lucky that he said yes, and I was so ecstatic. And then it just kind of
grew from there.
Took off from there. I love hearing people's why and their path.
No, that's awesome. That's great, and it's been really cool for us, right, to see your followers, grow. You grow on Instagram, right? I think I think we saw you when you were somewhere around 500, 600, 700, right? And you've grown significantly since
Yeah.
then.
Yeah, because I remember you had like the book giveaway when you hit a certain number.
Oh yeah. I
Yeah.
at 2,000 followers, I did
Yeah.
a book giveaway with Marcus Brotherton's a signed copy of Marcus Brotherton's
Yeah.
book. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that was awesome.
it's been fun kind of seeing you do these live series, and I can tell, right, just like anything, the more repetitions you get, the little bit better that you get at it. And
hmm
it's just fun seeing other kind of fellow history fans who are doing
Absolutely.
stuff like this grow, at kind of what we're doing the same thing.
Yeah, I think what
Yeah.
Sarah does is very unique and cool. She does the reels, the kind of history jokes,
Yeah.
with like the
Yeah.
books or like explaining history to someone, and I just love those so much. They're
Yeah.
just so entertaining.
Thank
Yeah.
you. It's my little my little nerdiness. That's when you can tell I'm on a lull of I need to distract myself from my history post. I'm like, I'm just gonna do a silly goofy post. So
Well, and
that's
then
where
you
that comes
asked me
from.
to be a part of one, and I was so honored.
Yeah.
We did the thing from Hamilton.
Yeah. That's right.
I have the
The
Hamilton book right here, but we did the thing from Hamilton where we did the hey,
women.
was
Yeah.
awesome.
Not a lot of women.
Hmm.
I think there's more women than we know. Don't really share
Yes.
a lot about history or in the history field. It is a
Hmm.
mostly male dominated field. So I wanted to feature awesome women who love history and share history and have a passion for it. So that reel kind of popped in my head, and I was like, I need to get Jen on this reel.
Oh,
So
so
Yeah.
awesome!
yeah,
It was so awesome. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
of
so
course.
Sarah, one of the kind of first, after we kind of get the introduction of our guest, things that we like to do, the next part we like to do is what I call a history word association game.
Okay.
So with that, I'll say a word, and usually off way off over here in right field. It's sometimes they just don't end up landing on history at all. But
hmm
these words, they may not sound historically oriented. I kind of tie them all together at the end. So this is just kind of a fun way for podcast listeners to follow along, right? Word association game, and for us to kind of broach a topic. So
Okay.
you just say the first word or phrase or paragraph, as some of our friends who've been on the podcast, and when I give you that word. So if I was to say G.I. Joe, what's the first thing you would think?
The Army.
Okay. All right. If I was to say Cobra, what's the first thing you would think?
The Karate Kid.
That was me.
That's what Jen said the same thing.
I said Cobra Kai. He said Cobra. I said Cobra Kai. Strike first, strike hard.
Yeah. All right. Okay, that's
I said
good.
the same.
That's okay. There's no wrong answers here.
No.
All right. If I was to say Neptune, what would you?
The ship.
Okay. If I was to say Axis, what would you think?
Enemy.
Right. And then that's all leading into World War II. So the
Mhm.
first one, G.I. Joe, that term, actually, I was kind of trying to look up something that wasn't quite so obvious in the very beginning, but G.I. Joe kind of became a little bit more popularized during World War II. And then
Mhm.
Cobra, that was actually I think it was an operation name for basically after the Normandy landing and that
Mhm.
first Normandy push. So that was actually, I looked it up. It was General Bradley, right? That was kind of his campaign. His operation was Operation Cobra, and then Operation Neptune was the naval portion of the Normandy landing, which
Normandy.
led in,
Mhm.
yeah, I think it led into Overlord,
Mhm.
right? And then the Axis powers in World War II. So that's just kind of a fun way for me to kind of hear how
Yeah.
people think.
I was all over. He's like
Mhm.
G.I. Joe. I'm like great American hero. And I'm like mythology.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
Biology.
So one of the reasons I like to kind of hone in on a particular topic is I like to ask, what do you remember learning about World War II when you were younger, and maybe something more that stands out to you now, maybe your kind of favorite World War II history story, or piece of that era. Like, what stands out to you learning about it when you were young, and then something that might stand out now?
So learning about it when I was young, it was very basic school learning about
Yep.
World War II. We really didn't learn anything about the Pacific Theater. It was mostly the European theater. We learned Hitler came to power. He invaded Poland. We got bombed by Pearl Harbor, and then we came into the
Yep.
war. And then
Yep.
then towards the end, we learned about the Holocaust.
Mhm.
So it really wasn't, when I was much younger, before I got into history, when we were learning about this, it wasn't I didn't learn a lot about it, but learning about it as I especially got older and learning about how in depth World War II was, it's crazy to me, because also you have all of these different operations, and in school we learned that it was pretty much the United States and Britain who were in World War II. There was nobody else involved.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We were the victors. We were the only people that were in World War II. And so, we thought that for a long time. And then realizing how many different countries and allies we had in World War II, that's just like mind blowing.
Russia, big one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah,
we were
Russia
friends.
we were friends, but
we were allies.
Yeah, but the thing with that is, I think Russia kind of looked at whose side should I be on?
Yeah.
Who is going to get us farther?
Yeah.
Who's going to win the war? And so that's who they sided with. So that's why they sided with us. They're like, Germany's going to lose. I'm going to side with the United States and just kind of go with their thing, because they were looking at the long picture and the future. That's just my opinion and some stuff that I've read. But interesting things that I've learned that I think is just probably one of the most fascinating things is the deception tactics before D-Day. So that is with.
Oh, we lost your
voice. Your voice out there.
Army and just the whole deception tactics, and that Hitler did think that we were going to invade Pas-de-Calais. And even when the D-Day landings happened and he heard them happening, he still thought we were going to invade Pas-de-Calais. And that wasn't it at all. And which is why he kept the Panzer Division up where it was supposed to be. And if he had sent in the Panzer Division when they requested it, the D-Day could have turned out much differently. But those deception tactics were just absolutely insane.
I love how you love that, Sarah. And I think, you love the Ghost Army. You always talking about the balloons that they used and the deception that they used. And, I'm like, Sarah missed her calling in Intel because they still, don't get me, they still do that today.
Yeah.
Governments still do that today. Armies still do that today, believe me. And so it's very interesting that that's something that's very useful. And it's a tactic when you look at satellite pictures, is that real, or are they just trying to deceive us? And maybe it has something to do with you being a makeup artist, something that you're used to kind of making things well, how can I perceive it to, look different or get in someone's mind to think different? But you're buying the balloons all the time of the tanks and stuff.
Yes.
Well, it's basically what they had, right? They did big balloon tanks and trucks.
They were inflatable tanks, and the Ghost Army was made up of artists and engineers. They weren't made up of, G.I. Joe combat soldiers, even though they went through basic training and had some, had to learn combat and stuff, but they were artists and teachers and painters. And
so maybe that's what,
made up, made up the Ghost Army. And they just, these deception tactics of, creating whole fake military encampments, motor pools. They had ships, and then the sound, the gigantic speakers that would do sound of soldiers' footsteps and radio chatter. And they created fake insignia and went to town and started getting all chummy with the town folk, so that a spy was there, they'd be like, oh no, this is one of Patton's, armies, and all that stuff. It's just,
it was
so
great.
Crazy.
It was good worked.
Yeah, I think
it worked.
I'm similar to you as far as learning World War II when I was young. The one thing that when I was thinking about this, I learned the basics, same as you, just like you said. The one thing I remember that stuck out to me probably in my high school years was the military industry that came out of World War II and the American kind of industrial, almost like another industrial age really for us.
Sure.
For some reason that always just stands out in my head, and then all the surplus type that we had after the war.
I think the big thing people learn about World War II in high school and grade school is Nazi.
Yeah.
Right. I think it gets ingrained in our mind.
It
does.
The
swastika and the Nazis bad.
Yeah.
Right. And then you're watching movies. Right. So any Schindler's List or any movie of the time, you're that's really ingrained that the enemy is Nazi. It really, you really don't think about Japanese or
You don't.
Italy, right?
Right.
It's just
Not as
Nazi.
much.
So,
Yeah.
and like you said, Sarah, you really think of the European front. You know, it's
Yeah.
very rare we talk about the Pacific front.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I probably have studied the Pacific Front a little bit more just because of Navy and a lot of
Yeah.
Navy education. But I actually heard a very interesting story about England in World War II just the other day. So just this last week, I was up in Newport, Rhode Island. There's some Navy stuff up there, and a friend of mine, a coworker of mine, he worked for a strike group out here in the Norfolk area and volunteered to do some kind of joint work with the United Kingdom, right, with the UK. So they would go over there and do joint exercises. And so with their ships, our ships, kind of doing all sorts of stuff. So he was over in London at some point in time. This was a few years ago, and they were talking. They were kind of getting shown around, right? Giving them a little bit of tour. And what they have, what's one of their bases is like Portsmouth. I think it's outside of the London area. They were telling them a story. They told my friend Greg a story about a toy maker during World War II who was asked to make kind of like a scale size model of the coast of like all the English coast in France and the various coasts by the British government, right? By the army, by the Navy. And so this toy maker, he's making this kind of scale size model of the coast, and he assumed so that they could do their planning and this, that, and the other. And so this toy maker finishes it up whenever it is. It's late at night, but it's in a rush because everything, back then they tried to do it now. So he had it in the back of his truck with either someone who worked for him or his son or something like that. Driving up to the Portsmouth base, and there's a midshipman. So this is someone who's not even technically like a full-blown naval officer yet. So there's a midshipman. It's in the middle of the night. It's like midnight, who's kind of standing gate guard. And so they stop him there, and they're kind of looking. They're like, "What are you bringing?" He's like, "Oh, I'm bringing this, scale size model or whatever like that of the coast." And they kind of look in the back, this midshipman. So he's thinking, he's like, "Well, we don't need the whole, we just need Normandy." And then he realizes right then and there what he just said, because Normandy was in like 6 months. So he's like, "Oh no, I just gave away what's going to happen in 6 months."
no, and it's locked you up for 6 months.
So that's exactly what they
Wait,
did.
really? I didn't hear the story.
That's exactly what
But
they
that's
did.
what I
They were
would
like,
do.
"Hey, bring your stuff on in." And that guy didn't leave the base for 6 months
That's what
until
Oh
after
my
Normandy.
gosh.
You've seen too much.
I apparently it's like a legit true story. I tried to look it up online earlier today and I couldn't find it. So maybe this is one of those like kind of urban legends that's been passed down, in the Navy or in the military over there. But I believe it.
I believe it because I believe a midshipman would be that dumb.
Yeah. But
That's a rabbit hole I'm going to be going on.
I know. I was trying to search it out. I'm going to talk to my friend again when I see him next week because I was thinking about that. But I talk about a crazy story, right? About World War II. And to your point, right, into like all the deception and this, that, and the other, that stuff was like really tightly controlled because it was so important at the time.
And no one knew who the spies were.
Right.
The spies were so deeply embedded, right? Both sides really feel grounded in their cause, right? The Nazis feel very grounded in their cause. The Americans feel so. The spies are deeply embedded, right? And so, you have to really be careful of who you're talking to. It kind of reminds me of Francis Scott Key, though, right? Because that's what he does. He goes to that ship to get the guy, Dr. Beans, free. And they're like, well, now you have to stay because we're bombing Baltimore tomorrow. And you saw the plans. Yeah. So now you got to stay and watch.
So they kept him there. And that's when he got inspired to write this Star
So it's like, you've seen too much. Now you must stay.
But he told me that story. And I was just, he told it, we were talking about it over dinner. And he's like, oh, yeah, this is the story that they told us. And I guess it's apparently true,
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah,
I mean, loose lips sink ships.
That's
true.
True.
That was, one of the best. It is true. So.
It's true. OPSEC, all those things. Any ships writing emails and stuff. Now your emails go through a filter. They search words to make sure you're not saying stuff that they'll back. But
Now it's they try to restrict social media and they tell people, hey, don't tell us. Don't put on social media when you're pulling into port or that you just
ships
left
movement.
somewhere, ships movement, stuff like that. So But yeah, it's just super fun, and I know World War II. I mean, that could be 3 podcasts in itself.
I didn't hear anything.
Yeah.
I didn't hear.
Yeah.
I know.
Nobody what?
I'm just
Oh
a
my
toy maker.
gosh.
I didn't hear anything.
Yeah.
Please let me go. But I guess he got stuck there for 6 months until after the operation was over.
Oh man.
Yeah, pretty
That's
wild.
insane.
So moving on from that, because I'm sure we could talk World War II history for numerous episodes of this podcast. But we like to move on to something that's a little bit more personal to you. And we like to ask, like, what's the first big remember growing up, like that first time where it's either something on the news or you actually remember being like, oh my gosh, like here's the bigger world out here, or for lack of a better word, I love what the Daily Bell Ringer he told us, a couple months ago. Young kids tend to be just, for lack of a better word, narcissistic, right? They think that it's just them in their bubble, and then there's that first time where you remember something, some major historical event. Could be local, could be national, global. But what's kind of the first, what you would think of as a historical event that you remember growing up?
September 11th.
Okay.
Yeah, I was. It was the first. I've seen other historical events on the news growing up, but I was at the age, I was 13 when 9/11 happened, and we watched it live on television in school. I heard everything come over the radio, and I didn't realize like the seriousness of it until we were watching it on TV and the towers falling on TV and realizing everything of what just happened. Because before that, we didn't know really what a terrorist attack was.
Yeah.
We didn't, even though there had been some that have happened prior to that, in other countries and stuff, but we didn't know that. And so it was the first time it was the first historical event that I really grasped onto and changed the way that I thought and looked at the world, I guess. So that would probably, that would be it. That's the one that sticks in my
And you were 13.
head.
Were you in school when it happened? And did the teachers turn it on TV, or how'd you learn about everything?
It was a Tuesday. I remember.
It was, so I was actually getting ready for school, and I had on Jammin' 95.5, our hip hop radio station here.
Oh, yeah.
And breaking news came on, and they were like, a plane has flown into the Twin Tower, one of the Twin Towers. And I remember calling my best friend at the time, and I'm on the phone. I'm 13. I'm putting on makeup, and I'm like, oh my gosh, a pilot flew into a building. How did he not see the building? Like I had no idea, and all that stuff. And my dad came in my bedroom because he was watching the news in the morning, and he said, get ready, I'm taking you to school. And he had the most, I've never seen that kind of look on his face, like kind of like a ghostly look on his face. And I was like, okay. And I remember the drive to school being very quiet. And then when we got to school, we had our like little pod classroom areas, and all the teachers were standing out there, and they had the TVs out, and they had us all sit down. We didn't even put our backpacks or anything away in our lockers. And they go, we're going to have you watch what's happening. And they explained everything. I'm getting a little bit of goosebumps right now. They explained everything. They go, if you have questions, let us know, but this is really important. You guys need to watch it. And we just watched the news and watched everything happen on TV. And we got let home from school early that day. And then,
I mean,
Wow.
I'd say good for your school
I
for
do
kind
too.
of really like saying like, hey, this is something that this is a big thing
For the country,
right? Because
and we're here for you if you want to talk about it.
Because a lot of
safe place
schools
to
would
watch
just
it.
say, hey, school's canceled, stay home. We don't know what's going on, right? But good for them for saying like, hey, we recognize that this is something that's serious, and it's going to be a historical thing. So let's sit here and let's talk about it, right? Let's be together in this.
Now, have you ever been to New York before that? Have you had?
I've never been to New
from
York.
Like seeing it on TV with the.
I knew it from TV, and at the time, I really wanted to be a Broadway actress, so I was I had New York posters and all that stuff on my wall. So like, but I mean the this, I didn't know the seriousness of it until I saw Miss Slim and Miss Nomi, who were my age, at the time, crying watching this on television. And I think that's the moment I knew how serious this was.
Yeah.
And but just,
Yeah.
Yeah. 9/11. We've talked about where we were. You were in the Naval Academy.
I was in the Naval Academy.
I was 3 days away from getting my wings, my aviator wings.
Yeah.
I had just finished flight school. I was actually sleeping in because I was done with flight school. My parents were coming in, and my mom called me, woke me up, and she's like, "Turn on the TV." And I was like, "I just partied all night," like, and I was like, "Okay." And she's like, "A plane flew into the tower," and I'm like, "What?" And I'm like, "Was it like having engine problems?" She's like, "We don't know because at the time you didn't know, right?"
Yeah.
And I'm talking to her on the phone, and all of a sudden I see the second plane fly into the tower, and I said, "Mom, I gotta go."
Yeah.
And that's when the base started calling, and they're like, "No one come on base." And we hadn't heard where we were going yet, right? Like we hadn't heard what our assignments were. And our commanding officer called everybody who was getting winged, and he's like, "We're going to meet at the Waffle House off the base." So all of us, like there was like 20 of us who just getting our wings, and Marines and Navy, because we trained together. So I was there with a bunch of Marines. And I was supposed to have orders to Japan. I was supposed to be the first female pilot they had ever had in Japan.
Oh,
and
wow.
He told me, at the time, I didn't have my call sign yet, but Mitchell was my last name. And he's like, "Mitchell, you're not going to Japan. You're going to San Diego." And I was like, "Okay." Like you just, at that moment, you didn't care.
Yeah.
We kind of knew that things were serious and we were going wherever we were needed. But things changed so fast. In those 3 days, like my parents had to be on a list. Cars got checked going into the base. You could only have so many people at your winging. Like it was just amazing how the seriousness changed. Because before it's like, "Yay, the Navy! I'm gonna see the world and have a good time." And then it was like, "Wait, now I really have to like do stuff. Like I'm gonna have to learn how to do this." And so it was a lot different.
Yeah. For me, I remember it was a Tuesday. Because one, I was in school, right? And that was a day I remember I only had one class. That was like my light day. That was like, oh yeah, I get to not do anything today.
Yeah.
And so I had already done my one class, and I was like walking back to my room, and I walked by a teammate of mine, and he says, "Hey, have you seen?" I was like, "Have I seen what?" He's like, "Go upstairs and go turn on TV." And so I got up there right as I turned it on. I was the only one in our floor. So at the Naval Academy, there's Bancroft Hall. It's, I think, like the second largest dormitory in the world. It's massive.
Yeah.
And so I run up, to my floor, turn on the TV just as the second, plane hit. And so I go get my company officer, who's a lieutenant, right? And I think back on it now, it's like, if I was a lieutenant, I would know what to do. And I said, "Hey," I was like, "Hey, sir, I think you need to come watch this, And then I just remember for us, because we're in Annapolis, I mean, we're like a 3-minute plane ride from DC. I mean, it's like, it's a 30-minute drive, right? So we were all like, we had to stay inside and this, that, and the other. So yeah, 9/11 is definitely one of those ones. And I think.
And you had kids whose parents were at the Pentagon.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had classmates and company mates whose parents were at the Pentagon. They ended up, the one or two guys that I knew, that their parents were okay. And then later on, I had a ship CO, actually my second ship CO, who I was never a huge fan of, but he actually he pulled people out of the Pentagon. Like he was in that wing, and actually he was one of the people going in and grabbing people and helping pull people out and this, that, and the other.
Crazy.
But I think, to your point, Sarah, and this is a common theme that I see for kind of the first things that we remember, and you mentioned it, was you notice the adults around you.
Yeah, how your parents
reacting
react
to it. Your dad, your teachers, and it's really kind of that first time that they show that vulnerability and you notice it as a kid. That's, I think, what kind of clicks the light bulb. You're like, "Oh my gosh, this is
serious." Yeah.
This is serious, So yeah, thank you with us. That's always
a great story, because I always feel very old.
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh, 9/11. I remember when I went back to school, I think I was talking to you, Sarah, Lisa, about it, and I went back to school 20 years later. I got my undergrad, and then 20 years later, I went back to my master's. And I remember doing a 9/11 day, and I'm like, "Where were you in 9/11?" They're like, "I was in kindergarten." I was like, "Oh my god."
I know, you're like, "Oh."
It was like kindergarten.
I still think like 2008 was like 2 years ago still. So like my perception of time is like so off.
when you start thinking that 1999 wasn't that long ago, like
God.
yeah, that's where I'm at. I think we interviewed one younger guy on the show, and I don't think he was born yet for 9/11. I think he was like 20 or 19 or something like that. It's actually very well spoken. As a good, if you're listening, go find that Civil War Week by Week. I think that's coming out actually on Monday. So anyways, to move on from that, thank you for sharing that with us. It's always really interesting because especially for one like 9/11 where we all have our own personal, we all remember where we were, what we were doing. So it's always, I always appreciate kind of hearing other people's stories. So thank you for sharing that with us. Moving on from that, again, more kind of into some personal history, like what's a bit of regional history that people might find interesting about your neck of the woods? It's something I like to ask because we get to talk to people from, oddly enough, we've talked to probably half a dozen people from Missouri, whether it's JD or Mr. Beats or the Daily Bell Ringer. Like everybody's from Missouri. I don't know what it is. But what's some regional history?
If we came to visit you, Sarah, like where would you take us to do a walk with history?
Yeah, like something that you guys know, I might not be familiar with.
Well, that's kind of Oregon history is it's not a lot of military history or anything. It's very industrialized newspaper. Obviously the Oregon Trail.
Absolutely.
Is here. Yeah. But I think kind of pretty much what, besides the Oregon Trail, I mean, if I was to take you anywhere here, it would be the Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum. It is the home of the Spruce Goose. Howard Hughes. Yeah. Oh yeah, you guys have been there. Yeah, I'm a tad obsessed with it.
Fox.
Yeah. You said that. Yeah. But there are a lot of Oregon's a really beautiful state. There's also, like the Pittock Mansion. He was the editor for the Oregonian.
The Pittock Mansion's on the hill there.
On the hill, and it overlooks downtown.
I just remember it had the great shower that like showers your sides, your kidneys.
I don't remember that.
Oh gosh,
you remember weird stuff sometimes.
I don't think we were married yet.
No, we weren't. That's right. We were.
We were still like we had to put on our best for each other.
I don't remember.
We were engaged. Yeah.
So is it really kind of like when it comes to history stuff in your neck of the woods? It really is like Oregon Trail, like
Lewis and Clark.
It's really Lewis and Clark, Oregon Trail. The newspaper industry with the Oregonian out here and the industrialization and that type of stuff. It's not, this is going to sound weird, but it's not like anything like, whoa, it's just, it's
cool pioneers.
It's life. Yeah. It's the evolution of the years of how everything transforms and proceeds and develops. And so it's just kind of that type of history.
Yeah.
Yeah. I bought a book. Remember, I bought a book when we were out there. One of the early female pioneers, Natasha something. She actually was killed by American Indians out there.
So if there's one thing that I've learned from Sarah's posts on Instagram is that history fans will buy books almost anywhere that you can.
Yes, that is a fact. That is a fact.
I do pay attention every once in a while.
So I bought a book in Oregon. I think it was like around the Pittock Mansion. We were out because his mama rented on that river over there, and
bunch of family
we went to a house there that was one of an older pioneer home, and they had her book and how she had traveled across on the Oregon Trail with children, and just how hardy those women were to do that and to like everything. You have to do everything. Like you're making bread every day, and you're like taking care of children and sewing and then she actually was massacred in American Indian massacre, but they had her letters and her diary, and they had turned it into a book, and I bought it. So I'm right there for you, Sarah. Like my little ode to you. I bought a book when I was out there. I was like, I have to read this. This is so interesting.
My mom is really big into the Oregon Trail and has a bunch of books in regards to that. She might know who you're talking. I actually don't know who you're talking about, but yeah.
And don't you have? It wasn't the Goonies filmed out in Oregon?
That's Washington.
The Goonies.
Isn't it
Astoria.
Astoria? Astoria.
Astoria. Yeah.
Sorry.
So
I
that
always try to
it's in the
talk this one and let me
I
do
would-
a
yeah,
Navy tour out in the Pacific Northwest.
it's like in the north, very tip northwestern
Yeah.
area. Yeah. It's
I
it's like a
to-
2.5 hour drive from Portland.
I would do that walk with history.
Yeah. So Sarah, what's one of the last questions that because a lot of times for folks who are fans of history, for whatever walk we come from, everybody's got that kind of either favorite historical character or favorite history story that if you kind of start getting into talking to friends, family, whoever it is, you're like, hey, do I have a cool kind of history tale for you? And do you kind of have like a favorite person in history that you like to kind of talk about or tell people about, or favorite, again, kind of event or story that's historical that you're like, hey guys, sit down because I've got a good one for you?
Yes, I do. And I have no idea why I am so obsessed with this, and I could just regurgitate the story like over and over again for years. But the sinking of the USS Indianapolis.
Oh,
and I'm sure anybody listening to this is probably like, here goes Sarah again talking about the Indianapolis. I find that whole, it was one of the biggest, tragedies and naval tragedies in military history for the war. And the story of how everything happened and the aftermath of it, they were the ship that helped end the war. They delivered the key components to the atomic bomb, Little Boy.
I don't think I knew that. Yeah, so you're talking to someone who doesn't know a lot of history. So you feel free to educate me.
Feel bad for me.
So the USS Indianapolis was tasked with a top secret mission to deliver key components of the atomic bomb, Little Boy. And they were asked for escorts and all this other stuff, and Captain Charles McVay was denied many times because Navy intelligence said there was no enemies in the water. And he was like, I really want an escort, and they're like, sorry, so they had no idea what they were delivering. They had no idea what the package was. They were all the men of the Indy were betting it was like 10,000 rolls of scented gold toilet paper from MacArthur. They had all these bets of what it was. And they made the delivery super fast, so it was like record speeds that they got. After dropping off the key components, they stopped at Guam, switched out the crew of the Indy, and then they were going out to do trainings with Task Force. I want to say Task Force 5, but it was with the USS Idaho and like some other ships because they were training for the inevitable invasion of Japan is what they thought they were doing.
Okay.
On their venture there, the Japanese submarine, the I-58, was in the water and set out 7 torpedoes. 2 of them hit the Indy, and it sunk in 12 minutes.
Wow.
1,195 men were on board the Indianapolis. 900 went in the water. They were in the water for 4 days and 5 nights, succumbing to injuries of dehydration, shark attacks, injuries sustained from the explosion. And they finally got rescued. And the crazy thing is nobody knew the Indianapolis was missing. Nobody knew.
Yep.
So the Indianapolis got erased off the board because of some check-ins. There's a lot of conflicting story. Like one of the commanding officers was like too drunk and didn't want to be bothered. I don't know if that's 100% true, but nobody knew the Indy was missing. And they finally got rescued after so long, and only 316 survivors were pulled from the sea. And then afterwards, Captain Charles McVay became the scapegoat for the sinking of the Indianapolis, and he got court-martialed. And the key witness of his court-martial was Hashimoto, the commander of the I-58 submarine, who sunk the Indianapolis.
Oh my gosh!
And he got found guilty of failing to call abandoned ship in time and then failing to zigzag in a proper manner, which Hashimoto testified it didn't matter if he was zigzagging, he still would have sunk the Indy. And also Captain McVay was instructed that he didn't have to do zigzag maneuvers unless he felt he needed to do them.
Sure.
So he ended up getting, found guilty. And years after the war, he was getting letters from family members of the people who lost their loved ones in the sinking and blaming him for the tragedy for not calling abandoned ship and failing to zigzag. You killed my son. I hope you have a Merry Christmas. And then he ended up committing suicide in 1968, I believe, with his service revolver.
Man, yeah, what a tragic story. And that's one of the things, like, I think that's a good question that I'm going to start asking more because, again, you obviously know that story very, very well, right?
You rabbit holed it. You can tell.
And when you say when you say in Indianapolis, I think like sunk and sharks. Like that's about all I can.
Jaws.
That's
That's
Jaws.
Yeah, he talks about in Jaws.
Yeah. So so I appreciate folks who can kind of recount the story and who obviously he probably told that story probably a couple times.
So Sarah, it was so correct me. I figured because of the components they were delivering and it was such a secret mission that's why when the Annapolis was sank, they didn't know it was off everyone's radar because they kind of wanted to hide the ship in the first place. Was that?
So what it was, because they were on a top secret mission, they weren't technically supposed to like check in or something, if I can remember correctly, after they delivered the key components, because then also they were going out to go do training exercises with other ships. And so it wasn't a shocker that the Indy didn't check in because of the top secret mission. But there was also just some miscommunications in regards to that that just sadly they lost more people than if
so you said 900 went into the water, 300 were rescued. They lost 2/3 of their crew within those 3 days.
1,195 men were aboard the USS Indianapolis. 900 went in the water. 316 survived.
Yeah, because when you think about it, like even abandoned ship of 1,100, 900 went in the water. That's a pretty good people who got off the ship. In 12 minutes.
Well, the ones who didn't make it off the ship, they were part of the explosion. So they passed from the explosion of the ship.
The captain. That's
Yeah.
such a scapegoat. He was.
And if you can think about 12 minutes of when you get hit by the second torpedo and the ship is completely underwater, like that's not a lot of time. That's actually really fast. Sorry, Jen, I totally interrupted you.
No, you're right. No, Sarah. So, I'm seeing this as like really, he had most of the crew in the water. It was the rescue that took forever. So the responsibility is not the captains at that point. The responsibility is who's in charge of watching the battle group. And he was used as a scapegoat. What a terrible.
And
was he exonerated? Wasn't he exonerated later?
He was exonerated. So a 13-year-old kid named Hunter Scott was doing his history project, and he did it on the USS Indianapolis. This was back in 1999, I think it was. And Hunter went like deep for being an 8th grader. He interviewed so many survivors. He went in and got records, like 800 records. He started reading, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, Captain McVeigh is not guilty. He got screwed." And so he brought it to his I can't remember the congressman's name, but he brought it to light. And then finally, after putting everything into motion, Bill Clinton signed his exoneration in 2001.
Cool.
So
that's awesome.
So he is exonerated, but sadly it was after his passing. And then also the survivors of the Indy, they had been for years trying to get him exonerated because none of them blamed him for what happened. And so it was a long time coming, but I'm happy that he got exonerated, and all because of a 13-year-old 8th grader doing a history project.
I love it. A historian digging deeper.
There you go. There you go. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I have a feeling that we could continue to talk for quite a while because the last 50 minutes actually went really, really quickly. So to prevent us from kind of bantering on for too long, maybe we'll have to have you back on again in the future. Those podcast and for those watching the live stream, where can folks find you online? Where's the best place?
So my main focus is Instagram. My handle is the History Chick 1941. I am also on TikTok, but I post the same stuff on Instagram that I do on TikTok. And then YouTube, I'm also on YouTube. That is where I upload all of my history behind the page videos after the interviews. So all handles are the same. So it's the History Chick 1941.
Awesome. Well,
yeah, and I'm going to give a little plug for Sarah. She interviews that guy from Band of Brothers that we love in Orville.
Oh yeah.
Oh, Scott Grimes.
Scott Grimes. She interviews him. That was a great interview. I watched it. I loved it. So if you're interested in watching her interview with him, check out the History Chick on YouTube.
Yeah. So again, for those listening, go check out Sarah in the History Chick. We'll definitely link her social media links to this episode. And thank you again for listening to the Talk with History podcast. We encourage listeners to head to the link in the show notes, subscribe to Talk with History for free on your platform of choice. And don't forget to share this with your fellow history fans out there, because we rely on you, our community, to grow, and we appreciate you all every day. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.
All right, so that's it for that. I'm gonna check on the live stream here. So I think if you just leave your browser thing open here for a little bit. All right, so we had live stream stuff is fine. So I'm gonna end my live stream.
Thank you for joining us live
here. Thank you for those 10 or so. Yeah, 84 views. Oh, that's not too bad.
Yeah.